Dr. Williams, you brought up one of my very favorite topics, which has to do with epiphanies. And you talked about creating ways for epiphanies to occur. I've been thinking a lot about that, and I'm curious. Oh, okay. I'm Connie Skillingstead with Prevent Child Abuse Minnesota. And I'm curious how you would suggest people create opportunities for epiphanies. I'm absolutely committed to the idea, so thank you.
Yeah, I think it's about trying to create environments. I think when you listen to what Atum has managed to do with her children, she creates environments to be supportive. But if, let's say that you're a daycare provider, and you know you have a number of children that come in and have reactions to what they've been exposed to at home, and you see that there are responses that you can actually point to. What things might you do to be able to be supportive of children given those circumstances? I think trying to identify what it is that you see and then be thoughtful about trying to create something to be supportive of folks. Would I be interested? What your thoughts are?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that what we're trying to do is to open up the space that allows a person to have one of these epiphanies that sometimes the dominant narrative can be the oppressive one. So people who are thinking in terms of deficits or a crisis, if we can kind of move away from that language and talk about those times perhaps when they were able to overcome something stressful or to persevere in the face of adversity and create a new narrative for them. Really not a new narrative, it's just bring to the surface some strengths or some resources that the person already had. And so I think there's a real responsibility to do just that in therapeutic work, not make the assumption that we're dealing with empty vessels or people who are devoid of strengths, even though some of those strengths may not be readily apparent early on in a treatment process.
What's your thoughts about creating?
Well, when I think about what is an epiphany, it kind of is back to what we said earlier, and I think Dr. Mack said also, which is this idea that there are insights or lessons or teachings or teachable moments or aha moments that we can have, when we really study the experience. And so what I tried to do both with myself over the years and tried to create an environment at home, to me that's what the talking is about. So I tried to really ask questions that were not questions to really probe or questions to really intimidate or push, but more questions that would imply or let the person know, let my children know that I really want to hear what's going on with them, and that I'm also having an experience that maybe I don't have words for. So we kind of talk through or tell stories about what's going on, or we may just listen to music. And in the listening to music, which Anthony and I did a lot, in the listening to music, we may have a song, Stevie Wonder was one of the people who, they may be saying something in the song, and the music might really cause us to have a moment of insight that really is satisfying and deeply, deeply nurturing to the emotional lock or blockage that we're having because of the traumatic experience. So that's how I remember it then, and I also remember it now. I mean, I had one this morning as I sat here and looked at him on the, I mean, it just was an amazing, I just had this amazing awakening moment this morning, seeing how his life, how your life, Anthony, and how the collecting of those pictures. And I mean, I was hysterical there for a moment, but it wasn't because I was hysterical. I was just having a moment of awakening that this is a man who really is my son, but he's a man. He's my teacher, my friend. That's an awakening. It's really an awakening about what what has happened, over the years in our lives because of this experience and because the history, I think, of our family.
Hi, my name is Marquise Armstrong, and I'm with Rubelin Family Services. Earlier, you talked about, You talked about how the environment impacts the whole family, specifically the children. And the question that I have is, do you think that it's possible for the formerly abusive father to partake in the healing with the children to break the cycle? And if so, what are some suggestions on how we could assist those fathers in partaking in that healing process?
I'm not trying to hawk this book, but there's a book over there that Dr. Jeff Edelson and myself did called Parenting by Men Who Batter, New Directions in Interventions and Assessments. And there's some suggestions about what things need to focus on. One of the things is that when you deal with, and we interviewed men who batter about what they wanted from the mothers of their children after violence, and we interviewed women who were victims of abuse about what they wanted from the fathers of their children after domestic violence. And there's some things that they sort of agreed upon, and some ways that they looked at things very, very differently. One of the things is that when you look at visitation, one of the things is that you've got to figure out ways to help men to negotiate in relationships without being manipulative, controlling, and abusive. And that when you do visitation, the question that we need to be asking ourselves, what's the end game? So at the end of visitation, if you're talking about, there's a new program that Office on Violence Against Women, Department of Justice is organizing called Safe Havens, that has an emphasis on trying to help address domestic violence issues, so battered women and children exposed. But they're getting referred to visitation centers by the courts that's not necessarily just focusing on domestic violence. It's all the reasons why we know that courts refer to visitation centers. But still, the issues about keeping women safe. A lot of women said that the number one concern that they had was safety. How do you keep women safe? How do you end up assessing whether or not his behavior has changed? How do you end up exploring and saying that if he doesn't respond, that there's accountability that needs to happen, but eventually they're not going to be at visitation centers forever. What is it that you want them to be able to achieve with making sure that she's safe and the children are safe, but he's responding in a positive way? A lot of times men who batter don't see battered women the same way that they see their children, that they're people that they need to discipline and that they need to control. That has to change somehow. And of course, you want to do that in batterage programs to the extent that you can, but those are expectations that you need to have in terms of dealing with in an environment of formal visitation. But even in informal visitations, if there's ways to be able to structure it, I get concerned about informal visitations. The number one place that people go to drop their kids off in a parental exchange is like a McDonald's, a Burger King, the police station, sometimes church, friends' homes. And those are places that don't necessarily want the responsibility or equipped to deal with it. So the other thing is that men said that they wanted to be valued in ways other than just a paycheck. But the other thing is, if that's the reality, then the question is, how do they behave in ways that's responsible? They have to take the responsibility and be taught how to do that. And so, I don't know if any other thoughts.
Well, I think as an outside observer of people in the industry and of the industry, which is, whenever I go to events, I always feel really humbled by that. I don't know if I bring anything except an opinion, at this point. And so I talk to people who are in the field, and one of the things, that even with the epiphany question, my question was almost back, well, who needs to have an epiphany? Is it the child that we're creating the epiphany for? Is it the parent we're creating the epiphany for? Is it the daycare provider? or the worker who needs to have an epiphany so that there is an increased sense of openness for opportunity and growth or something, you know, because I think so much, sometimes one of the great challenges is to move for you as someone who works in the field, to move from beyond the space that you stand in so that you can create a space where men can be included as part of what needs to happen to create safety for the woman, you know, and I don't know what things have to happen for that, but I think one of the questions posed to me, you know, when I was talking with a group of people working in the field, that was really interesting, is what would have happened had you lived in this moment in time, and with the events that you're describing, you would have been removed from your children, from your mother. That your mother would have been viewed effectively as a criminal, exposing you to potential harm, and so therefore you would have been removed, not you all would have been removed from your father, but you would have been removed from your mother, and you would have been in St. Joe's, or you would have been in foster care. And so, you know, what is it that then happens? And is that in a preferred situation? And even as I was listening, which is the other thing, I'm always interested to hear clinical descriptions of things I've thought about but don't know, you know, what it is. But I mean, even the question of, is there, you know, an impending trauma created by now removing them and putting them in this new situation? And so now, as a person who's working to help these children move through it, are you dealing with two traumatic things at the same simultaneously that you now have to manage, and creates a really impending challenge for you because you're not able to move on both of those paths in a parallel and simultaneous and productive manner?
Hi. I think my question is directed a little bit more for Anthony, but anybody can answer, that's okay. You have an amazing guide, your mother, that helped you through all the time where you were witnessing all the domestic violence. And I want to see, as when Dr. Mack was doing his presentation, have you ever wondered what would have happened if you have had any of the clinical interventions of approaches? How would that have changed your life?
You know, I, in some ways, when I listen to it, I feel like I did. You know, it wasn't formal, but I do know that, for example, the issues of quiet space and meditation. You know, when I think about the music, I mean, and even now, you know, in terms of the work that, you know, that I do around wellness and kind of personal health, one of the things I talk about is the idea of infusing ritual in your life and looking for ways to create these rhythms. And I think for people, we take for granted that this is going on for us, that we have a need to have a rhythm to our lives. And so I feel like I have kind of had that, you know, in a less formal way. And because it was less formal, it probably was more effective. Because I think the other thing that sometimes you have to do is trick people into getting what they need. And I think that has kind of been the consistent you know, thing that has happened for me. But again, the idea of ritual and an awareness of how it happens and creating that. You know, the idea of what I think about is having your internal life have an external expression, if that's a good way to think about it. And that this has been something that has kind of, that I believe I was kind of tricked into many, many times. And then over time, even, you know, as an adult, it became something that, you know, now that I'm aware of it, then you know, you kind of consciously try to create that. But I think that, you know, and I think the other thing is my mother became really more informed over time. So by the time that I'm 28, you know, she has, you know, kind of developed her little arsenal. And this really is, it's our clinical work now, but it's happening at our dinner table, you know. And then, you know, that has been a big part of it. But I think also looking at that work happening at different stages, you know, I think dating, kind of for me at least, early dating and friendships. Later, it's like long-term relationships, but then reconnecting to the family. Are you a part of the community? You know, do you have a sense of purpose? You know, all of that work, which is really what, you know, kind of describing it. I mean, those are all the questions that have happened. And ultimately, everybody has to go through the process of someday you have to forgive your parents for what they've done to you, because they didn't know any different, you know? And like that's everybody's work, even if your parents, you know, didn't have craziness going on to some degree. It becomes that, and I think that the normalizing of it, which to not just, you know, you have gone through trauma, and it's totally understandable if you actually go out and do that stuff, you know. there's a part of it that says, well, that is not normal. What's normal is people have a desire to go through the process of growth. What's normal is, the feelings that you're having and this. And so, okay, let's work through it and talk through it. And I can, again, point to many, many rituals that we now practice as a family that are nothing but good therapy.
And let me briefly say that as Dr. Mack was talking, I was making notes of the name that you have given the very things that I've done, kind of all my life. And it's really just fascinating. As a matter of fact, I created, with the help of a whole bunch of people, what is the Cultural Wellness Center. And all the things that I've done over the years, I do at the Cultural Wellness Center, and I have deliberately not made them formal. At the same time, as I listened to Dr. Mack, I realized that I have made them formal. And that even though I'm not a therapist, the things that he talked about and named, we do. And one of them really is this idea that every person that I come in contact with, in my opinion, has a story to tell, and that what I am is a facilitator of them learning from that story that they have to tell. And it really is an amazing experience to watch. And so what I heard him describing was creating this space where people can tell their story. I have no judgment of it. I'm not analyzing it. I'm simply pulling it out and putting it into manageable pieces, units that they can then process cognitively. And so I say to people over and over again that I haven't gone to any kind of school to learn this stuff. But it happens in our community every single day. And so what I think professionals have an opportunity to do is reinforce and really encourage people to really do what they know, and then in some cases name it in a way that makes them empowered to know it and then to practice it further. Because it was really incredible listening to you, because that is really almost verbatim. I mean, that's what I do, but I don't call it that. And that's what we do in our work at the Cultural Wellness Center.
And just to extend here, I don't think there's any question that the conversations that were taking place between Anthony and Atum were therapeutic. And I think the dilemma that we have sometimes in the academic world or even in clinical settings, we get a little bit haughty about the things that we know, right? Because it came from some book or some theory. We believe that that's gospel. And I think people are recognizing now that those lessons that we've been delivering from the academy or within the clinic maybe aren't quite as well informed as we would hope. And what we have to do is to, I think, bridge this gap between what's happening in households all over America and communities all over America and the academy, so that researchers can understand that there are a number of different ways that you can do therapeutic work, and a lot of it has to be driven by the people who are actually going through the experiences. It's impossible to really know what works therapeutically if you are limiting yourself to the ivory tower.
I usually try to think about it as that people are healing and transforming and evolving without our permission.
And I think on that note, we need to wrap it up. I'm getting the sign from my trusty timekeeper that we've run out of time for today. I want to thank all of our presenters. You've been a fantastic panel, and I know I've been touched, and my experience has been deepened from. And I want to thank you all.
Thank you.
So, So that concludes our lessons from the field for today. I want to remind you to please turn in your evaluation forms and pick up your certificates of attendance out the door where you registered. And thank you all for coming. Hope to see you again in the future.